Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Sam and today I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in November. In total, I read 10 books in November, or I say I read 10 books, I finished 10 books. I'm currently halfway through 2 books and I'm filming this video a day early because I want to make sure that I have time to edit it, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to finish those 2 books before tomorrow. But I'll do a quick summary and my thoughts so far on those books at the end of the video, but obviously they won't be full reviews because I haven't finished the books. The first 5 books that I read this month were actually for the $1,000 readathon. I vlogged that entire week, so I'll leave a link up here and in the description if you haven't seen that vlog yet. I'll also have timestamps in the description, so if there was a particular book that you were interested in, then you can flick ahead if you'd like to. Okay, so the first book that I read in November was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. I also realise whenever I'm editing these videos that it sounds like I'm saying The Bear in the Nightingale, and I'm not. I am actually saying The Bear and the Nightingale. This is the first book in the Winternight Trilogy, and Megan from Meg with Books is actually hosting a read-along for this trilogy at the moment. I'll leave all the details linked in the description if you would like to find out more. The best way I can think to describe this book is that it's a young adult fantasy that's set in a world inspired by medieval Russia, and we're following this girl called Varsia who lives with her family in this village at the edge of these woods, and there's something evil that might be brewing. It's very atmosphere driven and it's the perfect book to read at this time of year because of the setting in northern Russia where it's very snowy. It's full of myths and folklore and magic, and overall it's just really beautiful. I think if you like Laini Taylor's writing or Maggie Stiefvater's books, then I think that you would really like this because it has that similar vibe. The next book that I read was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and I loved this book. I ended up giving it 5 stars and I think it's one of my favourite thrillers that I've read this year. This follows a woman called Maggie who, when she was 5 years old, she spent 20 days living in this big grand house with her parents before they fled and ran away in the middle of the night and claimed that the house was haunted. Her dad then went on to write a book about their experience, which became this huge international bestseller, but Maggie has always thought that her parents made the whole thing up and that her dad was lying just to make a load of money. And at the start of the book we learn that Maggie's dad has just passed away and has left this house to her in his will, and so Maggie decides to go back to this house for the first time since she was a kid to renovate it and do it up with the intention of selling it on. However, when she gets there, this weird stuff starts to happen and she starts to think that maybe her dad was right all along and the house is actually haunted. One of the things that I like about this book is that it's a book within a book, so you have some chapters that are Maggie in the present going back to this house, but then you also have alternating chapters that are taken directly from Maggie's dad's book. I think it did a really good job of building the suspense and the tension, and the ending, I did not see that coming. If you liked the TV show The Haunting of Hill House, or if you liked The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, then I think you'd really like this and I definitely recommend it. The next book that I read was The Diviners by Libba Bray, and this is the first book in a historical fantasy series that's set in New York during the 1920s. We follow our main character Evie, who has got into a little bit of trouble back home, and so her parents decide to send her to New York City to live with her uncle for a few months. Not long after she arrives, her uncle starts to help the police investigate this murder, and Evie has these special powers that could help them to solve the case. I feel like that's not a very good explanation, but I loved this book. It's become one of my favourite fantasy books. I think I gave it 5 stars. I think the author did a really good job of building the atmosphere and making me feel like I'd genuinely been transported back in time to New York in the 1920s when you had things like Prohibition and Flapper Girls. I also really liked the attention to detail with the language because the characters use slang terms that I'm guessing are real slang terms that would have been used during the 1920s. The characters in general just had so much charisma, and I really think that this is such an underrated fantasy. If you like the sound of a fantasy book that's set in the 1920s, then I'd really recommend it. It is quite a long book. I think it's about 600 pages, but the plot was so engaging and interesting that it never felt like it was dragging at all. The next book that I read was Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert, and this is a sequel or companion novel to Get a Life, Chloe Brown that I read in October. We follow Dani Brown, who is Chloe's sister, and she works at this university. She's a PhD student, and one day during a fire alarm, she gets stuck in a lift and she's rescued by her friend Zaf, who is a security guard in the same building. People think it's really cute, and a video of them ends up going viral on Twitter, and people think that they're in a real relationship. Zaf then asks Dani to pretend to be his girlfriend just for a little while so that they can take advantage of the publicity to promote his charity. As I think I mentioned, this is the second book that I've read by Talia Hibbert, and I love these books. They are so cute but also steamy, And I think that if you're looking for an adult romance book, then I definitely recommend these. What I really loved was the diversity, but also the way that Talia Hibbert writes these characters that you really root for and you really want them to get together. The next book in the series comes out next year and I can't wait. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to love it. The final book that I read for the 1000 Doors Readathon was A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, and this is about a boy whose mum has cancer, and ever since she was diagnosed he's been having these nightmares, and then one evening he's visited by a monster, and that's pretty much all I can really say about the book because, as you can probably see, it's very short. It's less than 250 pages. I really liked this. It was very sad and very emotional. I didn't cry in the way that I was expecting, but I would recommend it because the writing was really beautiful. And so if you're looking for a sad but short book, then this is pretty good. The next book that I read was Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. And this is a mystery thriller about a woman called Jules who's not having a great time, to be honest. She lost her job and later that day came home to find that her boyfriend was cheating on her. So now she's also homeless. She's in a pretty desperate situation and she accepts a job apartment sitting in this fancy New York building, and they basically want to pay her something like 12 grand to live in this apartment for 3 months and look after it. And so it sounds too good to be true, and we all know that if something sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. Not long after she moves in, another apartment sitter goes missing and Jules starts to suspect that maybe there's something a bit dodgy going on. This is obviously the second Riley Sager book that I read this year, and it's also the second Riley Sager book that I gave 5 stars, and so I guess now Riley Sager is one of my favourite thriller authors. This was a fairly quick read, which I liked, and the ending, I feel like either people are going to love it or hate it. I loved it because I didn't see it coming, but I can see why some people wouldn't. My only minor criticism is that Jules as a main character is quite weak and she makes some questionable decisions. When I read thrillers, I prefer them to be plot driven anyway, but if you do think that reading a book with a frustrating main character would annoy you, then maybe give this one a miss. The next book that I read was Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I read this for the Do Sabalong, which is being hosted by Maddie from Book Browsing Blog. I'll leave a link to her announcement video of the read along in the description if you'd like to find out more. All I really knew about this book before I went into it was that it's about a girl called Karu who has blue hair and is an art student and lives in Prague, which to be fair is true, but also she doesn't really know where she came from. She was raised by this creature in this shop, and to get to the shop you have to go through this door that's essentially a portal to another world, and there are several of these doors around the world, but then one day handprints start to appear on these doors and it's all very mysterious, and then Karu meets a character called Akiva and she finally learns the truth about her past. But that's all I can really say without spoilers, but I do love Laini Taylor's writing. I think she does such a great job of building mystery into her stories. There are all these different layers to the plot and the world is built up very gradually, and you just have to kind of trust that it's all going to make sense in the end. I wouldn't say that this book was very fast paced, but I finished it I think within 2 or 3 days because I was really engaged and interested in where the story was going. This is the first book in a trilogy and it did feel like the first book in a series, not necessarily in a bad way, but there was quite a lot of world building, and so I think that it has the potential to get even better the more that I get into it. The next book that I read was Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. I have actually seen the film of this, so I was already kind of familiar with the story, but for anyone who doesn't know, this is a romantic comedy about a woman called Rachel who's been dating her boyfriend Nick for about 2 years, and he invites her to spend the summer with him in Singapore where he's going to be best man at a wedding and she'll have the opportunity to meet his family. What he hasn't told her is that he's one of the most eligible bachelors in Asia and his family are super rich. I did like this book, but one of my main issues is that it's told from so many different perspectives, and some of the perspectives felt kind of pointless and I just didn't care. I really liked the main storyline that was following Rachel and Nick, and I also really liked Ashrid's storyline. I think that if the perspectives had been limited to about 3 or 4, then it would have moved a lot quicker, because I found that there were certain points of view where I'd read a chapter and it would take me out of the main story and it would take me a while to get back into it. It was a lot slower than I was expecting, and I didn't feel compelled to pick it up, if that makes sense. I do think that the ending saved it. I really liked the last maybe 100 pages, and so I am interested in reading the sequel just to see where the story goes. The next book that I read was Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, and I did actually do a dedicated reading vlog for this that I'll leave linked. I think it's this side on the screen and in the description if you'd like to check that out. This follows a woman called Bryce who is half human, half fae, and she teams up with a fallen angel to investigate the murder of a friend who's killed by a demon right at the very start of the book. That's not a spoiler, it's on the back of the book. What I loved most about this book was the setting of Crescent City. It felt very immersive, and I actually mentioned in my vlog that it reminded me a little bit of Star Wars. The world is filled with all of these different supernatural creatures like shifters and vampires and fairies and angels and pretty much anything that you could imagine. I would really recommend this book if you like fantasy romance, and especially if you liked any of Sarah J. Maas's other books. There was quite a lot of politics, especially at the very beginning of the book, that took me a while to get my head around, and the pacing was a little bit off in places, but I did really like it, and the ending had me intrigued to read the next book, which I think comes out next year. The final book that I finished this month was Untamed by Glennon Doyle. This is a memoir. It's definitely non-fiction, but it reads in some places like a self-help book. I don't think I'd ever heard of Glennon Doyle before, but I think she's an author and an activist. And a few years ago, she was at a conference where she met a woman and had this instant connection. And throughout the book, she talks about how she came to realise that for most of her life, she'd been suppressing her inner voice and living her life according to society's expectations rather than what she actually wanted. The audiobook for this was really good. It's narrated by Glennon Doyle, and I could just sense throughout the chapters that she'd really put her heart and soul into this book, and she was very expressive in the way that she was talking. I did really enjoy this. I can see why it wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea, and there are a few content warnings for this for eating disorders and substance abuse, so just bear that in mind if you are thinking of reading it. Okay, so I'm just going to finish by quickly mentioning the two books that I'm currently reading, the first of which is The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm reading this for the Tolkien Along, which is being hosted by Beth, Ashley and Lauren. I'll leave the details linked in the description if you'd like to find out more. There's not a lot I can really say about this because it's the second book in a series, but if you've watched the film and not read the book, this is slightly different, but not really. Basically, the second half of the book follows Sam and Frodo as they continue their journey to destroy the ring, and then the first half is following the rest of the Fellowship. I really love these books. I read them for the first time when I was a kid. I haven't read them since then. This is the first time I'm reading them as an adult, and I love them even more because I feel like I can now appreciate this world so much more. The second book that I'm currently reading is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This is a very slow-paced book about four friends who met when they were in college, and they're now at the start of the book they're kind of in their late 20s and are living in New York. A lot of people warn me that this is incredibly sad, and I can definitely vouch for that from what I've read so far. There's also quite a lot of trigger warnings, so please check them before you go into this book because it's quite difficult to read in places. It's really hard for me to say that I'm enjoying this book because it is so sad. There is no happiness in this book, but I am enjoying the writing. I think that the author has done a really good job of creating characters that feel very real. I do feel really invested in them, and I feel like I'm reading about real people. This is, I think, the longest book that I've read this year. It's about 720 pages, and I'm just over halfway through, so I'm not sure what direction it's going to go in yet because there's still quite a lot of the book to go, but I feel like I am prepared, or I'm at least as prepared as I can be. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video. Thanks for watching if you've made it this far. If you've read any of the books that I read this month, then please let me know in the comments what you thought of them. Let me know if you've agreed with what I've said, and yeah, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Click subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!